Governor Christie, thank you for being here with the caucus at the New York Times. Let's start with collective bargaining. It's obviously in the news. Rick Scott, your Republican counterpart down in Florida, has said that he thinks collective bargaining is a good thing. Scott Walker, Wisconsin, obviously trying to take away some of that collective bargaining rights. You know, where are you, and which one of those guys is right, and what would be gained by denying public workers the right to collectively bargain?
Well, listen, I wouldn't say either one of them is necessarily right globally. They're going to make the right decisions that they think for their particular state. I mean, the problem in New Jersey is we've had collective bargaining that's been one-sided collective bargaining. Where no one's been in there standing up for the taxpayer and vigorously bargaining in an adversarial nature. That's the nature of collective bargaining. It's an adversarial situation, which you hope ultimately leads to a collective decision and conclusion where there are compromises, and where the people at the table then don't go around the table to try to change the terms of the deal, which the unions have done over and over again by going to the legislature and getting expansion of benefits.
But it's a process that you support fundamentally if it's done in the right way.
If it's fair, I have no problem with it.
So then you've got these folks in Wisconsin, I mean, protests for 8 days over this issue. Is that the right way to go about it? Is that the right thing to draw the line in the sand on that issue?
Well, listen, I think Governor Walker is doing what he thinks is right for Wisconsin. And I know him and I trust him. He's very experienced and he's making a decision for Wisconsin. So I think, I support him, but every state's going to be different and is going to deal with this in a different way. You have Governor Brown of California saying he's going to take away 8 to 10% of the take-home pay of state workers and do that unilaterally. That's not within the collective bargaining context. So the problem here is that the unions want to have it both ways. They want collective bargaining, but then if they don't get everything they want at the collective bargaining table, they use their money to go to the legislature and get enhanced benefits. And then when we try to take some of those enhanced benefits back legislatively, they say, oh, you're violating the sanctity of the collective bargaining process. Well, listen, you can't have it both ways. If they want everything to go on at the table and nothing to go on in the legislature, I could probably live with that. But if they're going to go to the legislature, you can bet I'm going to go to the legislature and the people to try to rein that back in.
There's a comparison here on the federal level. Obviously, there's a high wire act going on, possibly hurtling towards a shutdown by the end of this week, even. Where should principle give way, if it should at all, to keeping the government open?
Well, I don't know that principle has to give way on either side, but I think that in terms of the broadly stated principles that both parties have, there's plenty of room to work to try to come to a conclusion. And I think that the obligation of elected officials is to try to get there. Now, maybe sometimes it's not possible. Maybe you have to have conflict to convince people of the firmness of your principle. I hope that doesn't happen because I don't think anybody believes that shutting down the government would be a good result. I think that's an indication of failure.
You said at one point that if the Democratic lawmakers in your state shut the government down, you'd go back to the mansion, you'd crack open a beer and watch the Mets.
Yep.
What should President Obama do?
The president's got to decide, does he think he can play a constructive role in trying to bring the parties together as kind of the third party in this? Is he seen as a, not neutral, but certainly, a constructive arbiter in all this to try to help to bring people together? I think the public would credit him if he could. I don't know whether he has any interest in doing that.
You've been pretty blunt about your assessment of President Obama as a leader in his leadership role. You've practically called him a coward for not leading. Do you have any expectation that he would fulfill, step up to the plate in your respect?
Remember, my critique of President Obama was specifically on one thing, which was on the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid troika that he refused to deal with in the context of his State of the Union or his budget that he put forward. In other ways, I think the president has been very courageous in some of his leadership. On education reform, I think he's been very courageous, especially for a Democrat. I thought his leadership in the aftermath of the Arizona shooting was something that was real good leadership and brought the country together. In some areas of renewable energy, I agree with the president. I don't want it to be mischaracterized that I've said he's not a good leader. What I've said was he disappointed me when he didn't step up and deal with the thing that consumes 80+% of the federal budget, which are those 3 huge entitlement programs.
You talk about Medicare. You know, the president sought during the health care battle to cut Medicare. This Medicare Advantage program was used by Republicans across the country to convince seniors that the president was trying to take their Medicare away. Isn't that an indication of what would happen if either party tries to take this on?
No, because that was being done in the context of an overall piece of legislation that many people in the country despise. And so I think that the attack on Medicare was as much about an attack on saying you're doing this to give us Obamacare. If the conversation were, these are the things that we have to do to put all these programs on a sound fiscal footing going forward and not bankrupt our country, I think that would be received very differently than saying, I want to cut Medicare to pay for Obamacare.
And you don't think either party would demagogue it?
I think if both parties participate, then neither party will demagogue, because they're both in the pool together, so to speak. And so what I'm saying is, I think the president has to lead on that. I mean, I think you're unrealistic to think that a legislative body will gather the momentum and the consensus to lead on it. We elect one president at a time. I think he needs to lead on that issue, because it is the defining financial issue of our time.
Let's shift for a minute, stay with that subject, but shift to the 2012 presidential campaign. Do you see that issue, the entitlement issue, as also defining that race? And how do you think people should sort out the candidates that are going to come forward on the Republican side to challenge the president?
Well, it's hard to tell, given that it's a good year off before we're really engaged in that fight. I think it should be, because I think anybody who runs for president and is unwilling to talk about entitlements and put forward their plan on how they deal with it is selling people short. And so how it'll shake out in the Republican primary, I think, is very dependent upon who it is that's in the Republican primary. We don't really know that yet.
Is there anybody that you see that you have confidence in at this early stage that will talk about that?
Well, I think Governor Daniels gave a very thoughtful speech on that at CPAC a week or so ago. And he talked about that in some real detail. And I think Governor Daniels, has credibility given some of the things he's done as a budget balancer in Indiana. So I think he's the only candidate out there right now, at least, and listen, I've been following it that closely, but I think he is the one who most starkly put that issue out there. Now, that doesn't mean that if Governor Daniels would run, that's who I'd support. But it certainly is, I think, an important thing to be talking about. And he's the only one at this point around the country who's on the list of considering running for president that's talked about it.
Let me read you a couple of quotes. One quote: leadership today in America has to be about doing the big things and being courageous. Leadership, in my opinion, is not about waiting. Now is the time it matters most in New Jersey's future and America's future. And then finally, I started the conversation, I took the risk. I think that's what we elect leaders for, hence the name, all of which suggests an impatience and a desire for leaders to step up. And yet you've said you're not going to step up and run for president. Why should people not think that you're preaching something to others that you're not following yourself?
Well, listen, what I'm trying to do is inspire a conversation among those people who
but why
want to be president.
Why not start the conversation? Why not be part of the conversation in the next year?
Well, because I think that's an intensely personal decision. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't have opinions on what the national issue should be just because you're not willing to run for president yourself. I think that's a false choice. I could still be a part of a vigorous national debate and weigh in on my views on those things without having to offer myself for the presidency. And I think that's such a personal decision. You have to believe, as I've said before, and in your heart and in your mind that you're ready, and I don't believe that I am.
You're a big guy. People talk about that all the time. Do you sense that your physical bigness is a political asset?
It depends on the day. It depends on the day. I mean, some days I think people in New Jersey look at me and say, yeah, he struggles with his weight, and so do I. and it probably makes them feel that maybe I understand them a little bit more because I have some of my own personal struggles. Other days, just look at my Twitter page, and see some of the awful things that are written about the fact that I have struggles with my weight and some of the terrible things that people say. In the end of it, I need to get it under control so I can have my long-term health. And I have, 4 kids between 7 and 17. I want to be around to watch them get married and have children themselves. So we're going to keep working at it and try to get myself to a point where I can feel completely healthy.
Governor, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.